I thought I was coming home to peace, but 99 relateds were waiting under a family means forever banner that lied. I stepped out of the Uber just after sunset, craving nothing more than a hot shower and 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. But as I wheeled my suitcase toward the driveway, I froze. There were cars, dozens of them lining both sides of the street. Music, laughter, and children's screams poured out of my house like a tidal wave. My house. My sanctuary after 3 grueling days at a cancer research conference. And then I saw it, that banner. Family means forever, it declared, hanging proudly across the living room window like some twisted punchline. Underneath it were faces I hadn't seen in years, some I barely recognized, crowded into my home without a word of warning. That was the moment I realized that whatever forever meant to them, it clearly didn't include me. But to understand why this felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind, I need to take you back a few years. Before the banner, before the crowd, before the lies, they were my family. And I believed that meant something. Growing up, our house in upstate New York wasn't fancy, but it was warm. My dad, a high school science teacher with a goofy sense of humor, used to say, "We may not have much, but we've got each other. That's gold." I believed him. Especially during those long, snowy winters when Mom would make her famous chicken pot pie and we'd all curl up in the living room watching Jeopardy. Back then, my older brother Lucas was my hero. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with algebra, and even gave me his lucky pen before my SATs. When Dad passed away from a sudden stroke the summer before I turned 20, everything changed. The house got quieter. Mom got harder, stricter, less patient. Lucas, newly married to a woman named Tessa, stepped up. At least on the surface, he was the one who suggested we keep the house in the family. "Let's both invest," he said. "You take the upstairs, I'll take the downstairs. We'll convert the garage into a suite for Mom. That way we're always together." It sounded like a solution soaked in love and logic. I was hesitant. My schedule as a biomedical researcher was demanding, but Lucas insisted. "This way Mom won't be alone, and we're building equity. It's a win-win." I wanted to believe in that version of family. So I took the plunge. I used most of my NIH grant stipend as a down payment. Lucas got a loan co-signed by Tessa's parents. We drew up a co-ownership agreement, mostly at my insistence, something my attorney friend Maya pushed for. Clear boundaries, prevent future disasters, she warned. I didn't want to think that way about my own brother, but I listened. The first year was hopeful. I'd come home from long days in the lab, and Lucas would be grilling in the backyard, music playing, the smell of barbecue in the air. Sometimes we'd share a beer on the back porch while Mom watered her garden. It felt like the beginning of something real, a patchwork family trying to stitch together after a loss. I was traveling a lot, conferences, collaborations, field work, but every time I returned, I brought gifts. I remembered birthdays. I made time for Sunday dinners when I could. I texted to check on Mom. I dropped off groceries if I noticed something missing from her fridge. When I got my first big fellowship, I invited them to the award ceremony. They didn't come. Tessa had a yoga retreat. Lucas had a big quarter at work, but they promised they were proud. I still held on to the idea that we were close, that we were trying. I ignored the little things, the way Lucas would schedule family barbecues when I was out of town, how Tessa's voice tightened every time I brought up work, the way Mom started referring to their downstairs unit as the main house. Because that's what you do for family, right? You give grace, you bend. When Mom had a minor surgery, I stayed up 3 nights in a row monitoring her vitals and feeding her soup. Lucas showed up the second day with flowers. Tessa didn't come at all. Still, I told myself it was enough, that I was enough. In December, I flew home early from a conference in Montreal just to attend our annual holiday dinner. I arrived with gifts carefully wrapped, a handmade ornament for the tree, and even Mom's favorite mulled cider mix from a boutique shop. When I stepped through the door, I found everyone halfway through dinner. No one had noticed I was missing. My seat at the table had already been filled by Tessa's cousin. I laughed it off, I always did. I told myself they were forgetful, not cruel. Lucas joked that I was too fancy for family dinners now, referencing my job at the university's research hospital. I smiled, pretended it didn't sting. But deep down, I began to question things. My name was on the mortgage, yet decisions were being made without me. My achievements were quietly ignored while Lucas's insurance sales awards were met with applause. I'd once imagined that sharing a home would bring us closer. Instead, it felt like I was fading into the wallpaper. Still, I held on. I thought maybe if I just gave more time, more effort, and more kindness, they'd finally see me. Looking back now, I realize I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about whether they saw me, it was whether they ever wanted to. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being edged out. You don't always notice it until you're standing on the outside looking in. First, it was little things. Sunday dinners getting rescheduled last minute without telling me. A family group chat I wasn't added to until 3 months after it started. Inside jokes that went over my head because apparently they had happened at gatherings no one told me about. "Oh, we thought you'd be busy," they'd say with a shrug. And maybe I was, but it still hurt not to be asked. Tessa started leaving notes in the kitchen, passive-aggressive post-its reminding me to rinse dishes or not use their olive oil. I reminded her gently that I'd bought that olive oil. She smiled and said, "Oh, must have been a mix-up." Then came the party invitations. Lucas and Tessa loved hosting. Halloween, birthdays, game nights, I was always invited as a formality, usually after everything had already been planned. "We assumed you'd be at another conference," Lucas would say. Or worse, "It's just casual." The one time I showed up, I found my office door open and guests using my bathroom. One woman even asked if I was the tenant upstairs. I tried to set boundaries, kindly, respectfully. I asked Mom to text before coming into my apartment. She said she shouldn't need permission to see her daughter. I asked Lucas not to use my kitchen tools for his events. He said it was all communal. When I pushed back, I was told I was making things awkward. Meanwhile, every family event still revolved around Lucas. When he got promoted at his job, they threw a dinner. When I published a paper in a leading journal, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to talking about Lucas's barbecue plans. One day I came home to find new curtains in my living room. Tessa had taken it upon herself to brighten the space. She'd taken down my blackout drapes, folded them neatly, and left them on my bed. I stood there staring at the cheerful yellow fabric she'd chosen, as if that small act didn't scream control. But I swallowed it all, because I didn't want to be the problem. I didn't want to be the one who couldn't fit in. Even when I found out Mom had listed my upstairs apartment as part of Lucas and Tessa's home in a local charity write-up, I let it slide. When neighbors started calling Lucas the man of the house, I bit my tongue. When Tessa corrected someone at a neighborhood event saying, "Emily's just renting space here while she works," I smiled through my teeth. There was one day, one ridiculous, painful day that I still can't laugh about. I got home early from the lab, utterly drained, and found my bedroom door open. Inside, Mom and Tessa were reorganizing my closet. "You had so many things you never wear," Mom explained. "We thought we'd help you simplify." They had taken out half my wardrobe, boxed it, and labeled it "Donate." I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. "These are my clothes," I said. "This is my space." "You're so sensitive," Tessa muttered, brushing past me. Lucas arrived just then and asked what the fuss was about. When I told him, he laughed. "They're just trying to help. Don't be so dramatic." That was when the shift started. Quiet, invisible, but permanent. I stopped trying as hard. I came home less. I worked later hours. I stopped sharing wins. Because what was the point of opening your heart in a house where no one noticed it beating? The turning point came one evening in early spring. I had just wrapped up a presentation for a grant review committee and decided, on a whim, to stop by the house. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I thought it might be nice to surprise Mom with dinner. But when I walked in, the house was buzzing with activity. The living room was filled with people, decorations, food, another party, Tessa's birthday. No one had told me. I stood there for a moment, invisible. No one greeted me. Mom was holding a cake. Lucas was laughing with his friends. It was like I didn't exist. I slipped away before anyone noticed I'd arrived. I sat in my car outside the house for an hour, staring at the dashboard, my dinner still in a paper bag beside me. That night, I made a choice. Not out of anger, but clarity. I would stop chasing a seat at a table I was never truly invited to. I would build my own. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I had just returned from a week-long symposium in San Diego, where I'd presented our latest findings in targeted cancer immunotherapy. The talk had gone better than expected. Top researchers approached me afterward with interest in collaboration. I was exhausted but exhilarated, carrying a small bag of local souvenirs for Mom, Lucas, and Tessa. For once, I felt like I had something worth celebrating with them. My flight landed early. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back a day ahead of schedule. I thought it would be a nice surprise. The Uber dropped me off a block away. There were cars everywhere, parked on the lawn, lining the sidewalk, crowding every corner of the cul-de-sac. My stomach turned. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor's party, but as I got closer, the familiarity hit me like a slap. Aunt Mel's battered blue Honda. My cousin Derek's truck. The maroon SUV my Uncle Greg had driven since I was 10. The porch light was on. The front door is wide open. Laughter, music, and the clink of glasses echoed through the air. And then I saw it. A giant banner stretched across the living room window. Family means forever. Underneath, through the glass, I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. Aunts, uncles, cousins. People I barely recognized. People who didn't know my middle name or what I did for a living. People I had no idea were even in town. I stepped inside. The noise hit me like a wall. Dozens of conversations, overlap. Children ran past me, chasing each other. The hallway was piled with coats, bags, and shoes. None of them are mine. Tessa saw me first. She froze, holding a tray of deviled eggs. Her eyes widened. "Oh, Emily, you're back early." Lucas appeared behind her, cheeks flushed. "Hey, wow, we didn't expect you till tomorrow." My mother emerged from the crowd, cheeks rosy from wine. "Darling, you're home." She leaned in to hug me, but I didn't move. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "Just a little family get-together." "A little?" I glanced around the packed living room. "There must be 100 people here." 99, actually, Tessa said with a nervous laugh. "We've been planning it for months. A Carter family reunion. Surprise." Didn't reply. I walked upstairs. The door to my apartment was unlocked. Inside, my office had been turned into a guest room. 2 air mattresses on the floor. My bookshelf had been cleared to make room for photo albums. My certificates were covered with children's drawings. My bedroom is reeked of perfume. My bed was unmade. Strangers' suitcases lined the walls. I opened my closet. My clothes were pushed to one side. Several overnight bags had been crammed into the space. I stood there in silence, my ears ringing, my chest is tight. Lucas knocked once and let himself in. "Emily, let me explain." "Explain what?" I said, voice low. "That you planned a 100-person event in our home and didn't think to mention it to me, that people have been sleeping in my bed, going through my things?" He raised his hands. "It wasn't like that. We thought it would be fine. You're never home. We figured it'd be easier this way." "Easier to lie?" I snapped. Tessa appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "We didn't think you'd care. You never show up for family stuff anyway. You always have your science thing." "My science thing?" I repeated. "You mean my career?" It's not personal, Lucas added. We just needed space. And actually, we were going to ask if you'd consider selling us your half of the house. I laughed, cold, bitter. There it is. Mom entered behind them. We just want what's best for everyone, sweetheart. Maybe it's time you focused on your own place, something closer to work. I stared at her. You knew? She hesitated, then nodded. Of course, I knew it was my idea. That was the moment something in me broke. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just walked to my desk, grabbed my laptop and passport, and packed a small bag. Tessa called after me. Lucas tried to stop me, but I was already gone. I drove without a destination, ending up at a hotel near the river. I checked in with trembling fingers, still half in disbelief. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. Lucas's fake smile, Tessa's shrug, my mother's calculated calm. The betrayal wasn't just in the logistics. It was emotional, psychological. They had made a choice to erase me from the narrative of our family, to paint me as absent and disinterested, so they could justify excluding me. The next morning, I returned briefly to gather documents from the filing cabinet in my office. I noticed something then, an envelope tucked inside my closet, hidden beneath a stack of winter scarves. It contained loan documents, credit card statements, and mortgage notices, all in Lucas's name. They were in trouble, financially, deeply. It made sense now. The reunion, the push to buy me out, the sudden affection, it had all been a setup. They hadn't just wanted to celebrate family. They wanted my silence, my signature, my exit. But they had underestimated me. I called Maya that afternoon. Tell me exactly what legal ground I have, I said. My voice didn't shake, not anymore. She listened, took notes, and then she said something that stuck with me. Emily, you don't just have a right to your home, you have a right to your dignity. That night I made a list. Every detail I could remember, every violation, every breach of our co-ownership agreement. I wasn't going to explode, I was going to strategize. Because if they wanted a war over what was mine, they'd just started one. I didn't leave the hotel for 2 days. The first morning, I lay in bed with the curtains drawn, the TV on mute, watching light shift across the ceiling. I kept replaying the scene. My mother's casual betrayal, Lucas's manipulative smile, and Tessa's dismissive tone. My bedroom, my sanctuary, had been violated. My memories were pushed aside to make rooms for folding chairs and family photo collages. That didn't include me. I hadn't cried at first, not in front of them, but alone in that hotel room. The tears came without warning, heavy, silent sobs that shook me to my core, not just because of the party, not just because they lied, but because of how long I had been pretending not to notice the cracks. I ordered no food, just coffee. I barely touched it. By the second night, I started drafting emails to my lawyer, to a property management company. I didn't send them, but writing them made me feel like I wasn't drowning. Maya called. Talk to me, she said. Don't shut down. I told her everything. My voice cracked a few times, but I kept going. You're not wrong to feel betrayed, she said gently. This isn't petty. This is real. Still, there were moments, long, aching moments where I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Had I made them feel unwelcome? Was I too absorbed in my work, too distant? But each time, I remembered the photos, the curtains, the bed, the storage boxes were filled with my things that someone else had moved. My home had been rewritten and I had been edited out. The turning point came late one night when I opened my email out of habit and saw a message from Dr. Renaud, a French researcher I had met in San Diego. His team was beginning a multi-year project on T-cell memory response and needed a US lead with my exact skill set. I heard what you presented last week, he wrote. Your work deserves more space, more support. We'd be lucky to have you. I stared at those words for a long time. More space, more support. Not tolerance, no obligation, not shared walls, and borrowed tools. Support wasn't a job offer yet, but it was the crack in the door I needed. I replied, "Let's talk." Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a journal, not a lab notebook, a real journal, one I used to write in during grad school when the world still felt wide and open, and mine. I made two lists, one labeled what they took, the other what I still have. The first list was long: privacy, peace, belonging, trust. The second was shorter: my name, my research, my mind, my ability to rebuild. But that second list mattered more. I closed the journal and, for the first time in 3 days, opened the window. Fresh air rushed in, cold, real. I wasn't okay, but I wasn't broken. The next morning, I forced myself to get dressed and go for a walk along the river. My body felt stiff, like it had absorbed the weight of every word unspoken between me and my family. As I walked, I noticed the way the early spring wind tugged at the bare branches, the way the sun bounced off the water in flashes too bright to look at directly. Something about that nature moving on reminded me that the world didn't stop for heartbreak. Back in my hotel room, I started making calls. No action yet, just information gathering. I spoke to a real estate consultant, a therapist I'd been meaning to reach out to for months. I even called Madison, my college roommate and oldest friend. When she heard what had happened, she didn't say, "I'm sorry." She said, "I'm furious for you. You deserved better." I needed to hear that. Madison offered her guest room. "Come stay with us. Get out of that hotel. Let someone take care of you for once." I thanked her but said no, not yet. I needed solitude right now, not comfort. Comfort came too close to softening the edges I still needed sharp. But her words stayed with me. "You deserved better." That night, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because I finally saw her clearly. She wasn't perfect. She had stayed too long, bent too far, tried too hard. But she had also endured, achieved, and survived. And she was still standing. It didn't feel like a full recovery, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of one. The email came 2 days later. "Emily, would you be available for a video call to discuss the lead research role?" It was from D. Reynaud's team in Geneva. My hands trembled as I typed out my response. Yes, anytime. The call was set for Thursday morning. I spent the next few days preparing not just my CV, but mentally. I walked more, ate better. I called Maya and went over the co-ownership agreement again, this time with renewed clarity. "We need to prepare for every scenario," I told her. "You're focused," she noted. "It suits you." That Thursday, I put on a blazer for the first time in weeks and logged in early. The faces that greeted me were professional, warm, and curious. They asked thoughtful questions. They'd read my publications. They wanted to know about my methodology, my goals, and my vision. It wasn't just a formality. I think it was a conversation. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit someone's expectations. After the call, I sat in silence, stunned by how natural it had felt. Like stepping into a room where the air finally matched my lungs. I knew then I was taking this job. Later that week, I visited the house. It was quiet. Most of the relatives had gone. I entered through the back door, unnoticed. My apartment upstairs was still in chaos. Crayon on the walls, glass shards on the bathroom floor. My framed photo with Dad cracked. I took photos of everything. Every stain, every box of my things shoved aside, every mark of disrespect. Not out of spite, but evidence. Truth. Maya filed the first letter of the legal notice that night. Lucas responded with silence, and then a text. "Seriously? You're going legal over one party?" I didn't reply. "Not anymore." Instead, I hired a property management firm, one of the best in the city. They took over my share of the house, preparing it for rental. I met with them twice and walked them through boundaries, agreements, and expectations. The agent, a woman named Clarissa, looked at me during the final walkthrough and said, "You've got this. I've seen women do this before. Come out stronger." I smiled. "That's the plan." Meanwhile, Dr. Renault emailed again. "We'd love to formally offer you the position, 3 years, full housing allowance, relocation support, and your own lab." I cried, not from sadness this time, from relief, from recognition, from finally being seen. I accepted. That weekend, I stayed with Madison. Her husband made lasagna. We drank wine. We talked late into the night. She asked, "Do you feel like yourself again?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I feel new, and I like her." It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the start of power. I also booked an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Keller. She specialized in high-achieving women dealing with family boundary trauma. This session was mostly me talking, pouring out years of swallowed moments, backhanded compliments, overlooked milestones, conditional love. She didn't interrupt, just listened, and when I finally paused, she said, "It sounds like you've been waiting for permission to prioritize yourself, but you don't need anyone's permission." That stayed with me. I started reclaiming pieces of my identity. I bought new curtains for my apartment, not to replace the ones Tessa removed, but to mark a transition. I got the cracked photo with Dad reframed. I packed what I wanted to keep and donated what felt like emotional clutter. Each item I boxed was a choice. Each call I made was a declaration. I wasn't running anymore, I was redirecting. At Maya's suggestion, I installed a new lock on my apartment door and left the management firm as the primary point of contact for all house matters. No more family check-ins, no more guilt-soaked conversations. Lucas tried to guilt-trip me in group texts. Mom sent a long email about what family means. I archived them both. Instead, I started looking at apartments in Geneva, researching the neighborhoods, and mapping routes from the lab to parks, museums, and cafes. I wasn't just accepting a job, I was building a life. And for the first time, that life wasn't rooted in compromise. I had my timeline, I had my voice. I was no longer trying to prove my worth. I was living it. One morning, just before dawn, I walked to the river again. The same path where I'd once felt lost now felt like it belonged to me. I stood there, watching the horizon burn into soft gold, and whispered to no one in particular, "I'm still here." And that was enough. I moved out 3 weeks later. Not in shame, not in silence, but with intent. The movers arrived early on a crisp Saturday morning. Clarissa met me in the driveway, clipboard in hand. "We've cleared the top floor. Inventory's documented. You ready?" I nodded. "I've been ready." Lucas and Tessa were not home. That was intentional. I'd sent a legal notice of the scheduled move. No more surprise appearances. No more drama. I walked through my apartment one last time. The new curtains fluttered gently in the breeze. My shelves were bare, but not hollow. Every item packed was a decision. Every step out was a boundary reclaimed. Downstairs, I left a printed letter on the kitchen table. Simple, legal, final. It stated, the transfer of management responsibilities, the restrictions on shared access, and the upcoming property review. Maya had helped me write it. Clear language. No room for guilt or loopholes. Later that day, I boarded a plane to Geneva. My new apartment was small but bright, with large windows and a balcony that overlooked the Rhone. My lab was modern, well-funded, and already buzzing with projects. For the first few weeks, I threw myself into the work, grant proposals, team meetings, and research trials. But healing didn't just come from a distance. It came from confrontation. One evening, I received an email from Lucas. It was long, rambling, laced with passive aggression. He accused me of abandoning the family, of making a private matter public. He said, "Mom cried every night." I read it twice. Then I wrote back, not with an apology, but with clarity. Lucas, I did not abandon the family. I stopped accepting treatment that erased me. You, Tessa, and Mom made decisions that excluded me, intentionally and repeatedly. What you call family became a system that thrived on my silence. I'm done being silent. I've acted legally and respectfully. If you wish to speak, it must be with honesty and accountability. Anything less will go unanswered. I'm like, I didn't hear back for weeks. Then came the mediation request. Lucas and Mom wanted to discuss terms with a third party present. Maya and I reviewed it. We agreed. The session was virtual. I logged in from my apartment, Maya beside me. Lucas and Mom appeared on the screen, tight-lipped, visibly annoyed. The mediator laid out the terms. Lucas started to speak, but I raised my hand. "I'd like to begin," I said. They blinked, surprised. I laid out everything, the violations of our agreement, the financial mismanagement, the psychological pattern of exclusion, the physical intrusion of my space. Mom tried to interject. That wasn't our intent. I looked straight at the camera. Intent doesn't erase impact. Tessa surprisingly stayed silent throughout. Her name appeared briefly on the participant list, but she never spoke. Maya presented our terms, a financial settlement or forced sale of the property. Shared ownership was no longer viable. There would be no cohabitation, no casual visits, no manipulative texts. Lucas scoffed. "So you're just cutting us off?" "I'm drawing a line," I said. "You can choose to stay behind it or meet me at it, but I'm not walking back." The session ended with no resolution, but I didn't need one that day. I had said what needed saying, and it felt like breathing after years underwater. A week later, Maya received their counteroffer. They agreed to buy out my share at full market value, no resistance, no delay. It wasn't a peace treaty, but it was closure. I took that money and did something I never thought I would. I bought a cottage in a quiet village outside Geneva. Stone walls, red roof, wild lavender growing along the back fence. It needed work, paint, plumbing, love. But it was mine, not inherited, not shared, not compromised. Mine. I sent one last email to Lucas and Mom. It read, "I wish you healing, I don't wish you back." Then I blocked their numbers. I kept Maya on speed dial. And I planted my first herb garden. Summer came quickly. I adjusted to my new rhythm, lab in the morning, market in the afternoon, and calls with global collaborators in the evening. My French improved, my sleep deepened, my smile returned, slowly but steadily. Some nights I'd sit on my balcony with a glass of wine thinking of the girl I used to be, the one who kept her head down at Sunday dinners, who laughed at insults to keep the peace, who asked permission to set boundaries in her own home. She didn't exist anymore. In her place stood a woman who had built a life from splinters, not bitter, just better. One afternoon, I got a letter forwarded from the old address. It was from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I didn't know what they did," she wrote, "but I saw it. I just didn't say anything. I'm sorry, and I'm proud of you." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside my journal. Not for validation, but as proof that the silence I'd broken had echoes. That even when you walk away alone, others may still be watching. And sometimes you give them courage, too. 3 months into my new life in Geneva, I found myself walking home from the lab one evening, a warm paper bag of fresh pastries in one hand, my ID badge still swinging from my neck, and a contentedness in my chest that felt almost foreign. Not excitement, not relief, something steadier, like alignment. The research team had just submitted our first paper together, one that bore my name as lead author. We'd achieved a major breakthrough in our work with receptor-specific therapy, and initial trials were exceeding expectations. Dr. Mueller called my word foundational. That word stayed with me. Foundational, as if I wasn't just contributing, I was anchoring something. I never felt that way in Boston, never felt essential. There, I was tolerated. Here, I was integral. When I got home to my small apartment overlooking a quiet square, I found a postcard waiting in my mailbox. It was from Aunt Grace, a watercolor painting of the Alps on the front and her familiar handwriting on the back. Geneva suits you, Rachel. I hope you're still drinking strong coffee and asking hard questions. Kevin told me about the scholarship. Your dad would have been so proud. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, reading her words again and again. The scholarship had been my final act of closure. I used a portion of the proceeds from the house sale to establish the James Carter Memorial Fellowship for underrepresented students in medical research. I didn't tell anyone in my family at first. I didn't need them to know. I needed to know that I had done something good with what I had been given and something right with what I had lost. Geneva had given me something Boston never could. Distance, yes, but also clarity. My days were structured but not sterile. My evenings were filled with real conversations, spontaneous dinners with international colleagues, walks along the lake, and the quiet pleasure of learning French slowly, one cafe menu at a time. I had even started mentoring a younger researcher from Tunisia, Amal, who reminded me so much of myself at 23, driven, uncertain, and hungry to prove something. Only now, I had the insight to tell her what I had once needed to hear. You're not an imposter. You're just early. Back in Boston, the updates from the property manager became routine. The tenant was renewing for another year. Maintenance costs were minimal. Kevin's lawyer had gone silent. Even my mother's emails had shifted from passive-aggressive jabs to short, somewhat thoughtful messages. Still no apology, but less pretense. In a surprising twist, Stephanie sent a photo of baby Emily dressed in a tiny lab coat onesie with future scientist printed on it. The message simply read, "Thought you'd appreciate this. No pressure to respond." I didn't respond, not yet, but I saved the photo. Maybe someday, when I'm ready, I'll tell Emily who bought the first stethoscope she ever owned. One Friday afternoon, while waiting in line at a coffee shop near the university, I noticed a familiar face on my phone screen, a YouTube thumbnail of a video titled, "How My Family Used My House While I Was Away and What I Did About It." It had 500,000 views. Someone had turned my story into animated content. The comments were full of strangers cheering me on, calling me an inspiration, a role model for boundaries. And weirdly, I didn't feel exposed. I felt affirmed. I watched the animation later that night, amused by the caricature of Kevin with his exaggerated hair and the cartoon version of my mother waving a wine glass while guests trashed my space. It was over the top, but somehow still true. When the animated Rachel packed her bags and left, the narrator said, "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what hurts us, even when it's called home." I whispered yes to no one. That night, I fell asleep wearing the gold locket Aunt Grace had given me. Inside was still the photo of Dad and me at graduation. I touched it before drifting off, not with grief, but with gratitude. I had become the woman he believed I could be. And finally, I believed it too. There are days now when I forget the heaviness, not because it disappeared, but because I finally learned how to carry it differently. Sometimes it returns unexpectedly, like when I pass a bakery that smells like the one Mom used to visit every Sunday, or when I hear someone say the word home with a tone that sounds nothing like loss. And in those moments, there's still a flicker of ache. But it's not the kind that breaks me anymore. It's the kind that reminds me I survived. My garden is in full bloom now. The lavender stretches wide along the back fence, and the thyme is threatening to take over the corner by the stone path. I planted rosemary for resilience, mint for freshness, and sage because sometimes you need a little wisdom with your tea. On weekends, I host dinners for friends, Scientists, neighbors, curious wanderers who've become unexpected constants. We sit outside under the string lights I strung up with help from a mall, and we talk about everything except work. Sometimes about heartbreak, more often about joy, and always about how strange and beautiful it is to start over. The thing no one tells you about boundaries is how lonely they can feel at first, like silence after a storm. But then, with time, that silence becomes peace, and peace becomes space, and space becomes a possibility. I no longer wonder if I made the right decision because I feel it in my breath, in the steadiness of my sleep, on the way. I no longer brace myself before checking my phone. I think a lot about that banner now, the one that read, "Family means forever." For a long time, I thought it was a cruel joke, a lie stitched into glitter and good intentions. But maybe it was only partly wrong. Maybe family isn't forever by default. Maybe it's forever only when it's chosen, nourished, protected. I still believe in family, but now I define it for myself. And I believe in forgiveness too, but not the kind that demands my silence, the kind that sets me free. If you're listening to this and you feel like your story is starting to sound like mine, I want you to know something. You're not selfish for drawing a line. You're not dramatic for walking away. You're not broken because you needed distance to breathe. You're brave, and you're not alone. Keep going, not because they'll understand, but because you do. Somewhere along the way, I stopped needing closure from them. I used to rehearse the speech I'd give if they ever apologized, imagining a moment where everything clicked into place and they finally saw me, really saw me. But now, I realize closure didn't come from their understanding. It came from mine. I understood that love without respect is just performance. That family without trust is just proximity. That home isn't where you come from, it's where you choose to stay. So I stayed here in this quiet corner of the world with soil under my nails and science in my hands and people in my life who see me as I am, not as they wish I would be. And in doing so, I've built something better than reconciliation. I've built a life. You can too. Start small if you have to. Say no once. Speak up once. Leave the room, the job, the house. If it's killing parts of you, you don't have to be fearless. You just have to move. Even if your voice shakes, even if your heart aches, even if the only thing louder than your doubt is your need to finally be free. There is a version of you waiting on the other side of the decision, and she's not afraid anymore.